Hello again, welcome back to RP-0 America. So I was looking at my original reentry vehicle and realized that I have some new tech. It cost $20,000 to unlock, but I've got a film return camera. And just as kind of a test, I'm going to try to place it, both like the entire camera assembly, which is a lot heavier than the bio sample that I had previously put into orbit. I'm going to try to bring the whole thing back. So I gave it a larger heat shield. I've switched to high test peroxide. So hopefully, just double check. Look, I've got antennas on it. Good things. Peroxide. Let me check how long it's going to survive. Maybe I need to throw a bigger battery on it. Let's see. So it's going to survive 6 minutes with that battery. Jeez. Okay. Diameter. Might want to throw some solar panels or something onto it too. Maybe that's going to be a limitation. Right now I just don't have the best avionics. I suppose it's very power inefficient. So let me throw 4 of these on. Why not? Oh, thanks. 4, snap 2. Okay, that's going to make this probably, substantially more expensive, but yeah, and not really have any effect on that. So, okay, I'll just blow up this battery and diameter and just see what I can do with it. I might have to, or I might end up cheating more power into it, but let's see. Hopefully that's I come up with a better solution at some point than that. But right now this is the best avionics package I have for it, because I want to send it into orbit, something heavy enough to manage this film return thing. Maybe I just need to wait until later avionics, but I thought this was efficient enough. Let's see, it's the, come on. Oh, it's because I've got that set. Okay, I just want to right click and see what I have. So the Able avionics package is going to consume 9 units of power a minute, and yeah, I don't know, I assume it would be able to, like with a 20,000 battery, maybe this is just inaccurate, I really don't know, but now it's recognizing. So I'm going to need more than 15 minutes in orbit. I suppose this might just end up being a whole video of getting this craft together, because I hadn't noticed or really thought that would screw me up. 3 per second, 9 per minute, because I need control of it. Like that's a third of the power usage, but also very expensive. It can't control this amount of craft, so I'm not sure what I can or should use. I've never tried to do film return, so maybe this is just me being a fool. But anyway, I've got this same, oh, all right, because I pulled it off, I need to correct this. Come on. Okay. So that's just to cover it. And and so I've got this, so just checking avionics at every stage, because this is a stage it will actually be in for a bit. I need to set up the staging. I'll set up the staging last, because I wanted to show how terrible the staging was before I did anything. So this, just quickly, I threw together, it's from the, if you've never seen it, it's a procedural interstage. It's a tricky piece because sometimes it eats nodes, so you want to get a little practice with it. I always adjust its size, like its the height, the actual height value, or change anything else when it's off, not attached to something, or else it might eat the node, like literally disappear the node on that engine, for instance. But I took it from here, attach it. Oh, come on, camera. I don't know why it's being so crazy. So I set the height really low, because I always attach it to the actual top node of that, so that that's what it will decouple from. And then I just add extra height until it actually gets up there. So this is a pretty straight walled, because the diameter of the Atlas, or of the Agena, is pretty similar to the top of this Atlas tank, which I don't think is a coincidence. I think it's actually designed that way. But just wanted to show how terrible the staging came together on this when I threw together the subassemblies. Now Nathan Kell told me a trick of, when you create a subassembly, create a bunch of blank stages above that, and I admit I haven't tried that yet with this craft. So that might fix my problem. Just when I go, right before I save a subassembly and I have everything ready, I should just create some blank stages above it. So that when they get pulled together, he obviously knows how stages get merged and such. And I don't. So that's probably good advice. I just haven't had a chance to take it yet. Okay, so first let's close that up and peel those. I just find showing this like kind of detail stuff of there's just like too many negative marks against for showing this detail of construction. I don't really enjoy showing it because, like, one, to me, like the procedural like textures and stuff of this craft just look ugly and hideous, and so that's why I think like people like Bevo and possibly Tyler Reyes actually make their own textures and throw them in, and I'm just don't have the time and I don't have the artistic inclination to do so. So that's why I think this looks hideous, and I can't wait till I get an actual Atlas or Agena-A. But yeah, that's why I don't like showing this construction. Oh, and the other is, I don't know, I just find it's kind of dull, boring what's going on here. So let's see, hopefully these are all the engines. Yep. And I think, you know, some people use editing to go through that so that they can show this boring part just sped up. But that, I don't think that makes it any less boring if I'm talking about something else while I do it. But I also just don't want to just sit and talk about how boring it is. So, okay, those are all thrown on. So I'm actually seeing some delta V, so that's nice from it. So past that, it's going to be staging, and so it's this, you know, self-ullaging Agena, so it can shed those walls, it'll pop those off, it'll separate, and then the next thing that I want to happen then is for the engine to light. Come on, drag the engine down. And I know the last thing I want to be is just the parachute to pop, so I know that's right. And the shell popping off is one of the last things. What about those? Okay, so that shell will probably pop before that happens, or at the same time. Yeah, I'll have it pop before that. Oh, speaking of which, I know one thing I'm missing is the dropping of this ring. There we go, so that's what that is. So the engine's light, and then we'll fly a bit, we'll drop this ring, and so we won't quite be in orbit yet, and that'll happen. So good, so now I'm actually seeing the delta V and such. So it has a really short burn time for an upper stage. But yeah, that's everything together. I built that new reentry vehicle. I'll see if it works. Let's just do it through a simulation. So save this craft. It's a relatively expensive craft, and that new science experiment, the film return capsule. So you can't transmit the science from this. Like, it's supposed to represent spy hardware, like we're actually trying for here, where you send an actual film camera into orbit, and then you'd return the film. So one way that many people who play Realism Overhaul RP-0 will do that with is, I think it's a mod called Manifest, which I've never used, but it's probably very useful for this. I think I have it installed. Okay, so let's do a, will 10 minutes do? It's not like, see the price, so 260, so the price doesn't change a ton if you add time. So if you feel like you might benefit from more time in a simulation, just go ahead and pay for it, take it. I'm also looking at what it would cost to, and time it would take to construct another launch site at Vandenberg. So for polar missions, I believe that's where they used to fly out of, and they might. And the reason is to fly something to the poles, or into a polar orbit, you want to head straight north or straight south. And if I were to fly straight north from Kennedy Space Center here, I'd pass over the United States, so I don't want to be dropping stages, in the US or in Canada. And if I fly south, I'm going over Cuba and Brazil, countries that you don't really want to be dropping missile parts on, because back in this period of time, you don't want the enemy to potentially be able to recover your hardware. You also don't want them to see a missile flying at them, because they might misinterpret that. And yeah, you just don't want to do that. So in practice, they would fly, the US would fly polar orbits, I believe, out of possibly out of Alaska, or as well as out of Vandenberg. One of the two, probably primarily one of those two. Probably Vandenberg, I'd imagine, which is kind of in California. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it terribly, but hey. Alright, so this is a good test of this craft. Hopefully all the engines light. Wish me luck. Looks like they did. Alright. So now I need to remember to fly. Whoa. I let it go before the engines were all the way up to thrust. So I need to make sure that I head with a heading south. So I'm not actually going to be, like currently during this test, at the exact position to go into this orbit, but that's basically what I'm simulating here. So I'm going to head straight south. So you can see there, that path is going south, but if I were to launch at the other side, once Earth rotates around underneath that, I could also fly directly north. So I think both of those would be options. And I'm also going to have to be countering the rotation of the Earth. Whoa, don't wobble too much. Because if you look at orbital view, so you actually get a boost of your orbital velocity, east going around the Earth when you're closer to the equator, but I think that's a liability when you're trying to fly into a polar orbit. So we need a bit of extra delta V from this one and a bit of extra luck. All right. Yeah, I just think those upper stages and their shrouds and such look awful aesthetically, but so I imagine that's me saying, hey, if you return film from here, you'd get 3 science points. I suppose that's true. Things were to go really sideways, maybe that would be a good thing to do. Okay, pitch over a bit. So it's a bit heavier than anything. Well, I guess we've never technically. Well, yeah, it's definitely heavier than any upper stage we've used on the Atlas before, because we've never used an upper stage on the Atlas before. So previously I felt like I was having to arc over really quickly and such to kind of match my velocity and targets and such, whereas because there's more kind of, from the perspective of the first stage, there's more dead mass above us, then we're not going to be arcing over as aggressively as we were during that last flight. Okay, so I think that's good enough. Let's just follow this down for a bit now. So I'm going to shut down the booster engines around 2 minutes and change. I should be arcing over more now. So delta V, so dynamic pressure, sorry, is dropping now. So I'm past max Q, which occurs roughly around a minute for most rockets, unless they have unusually high thrust to weight or low thrust to weight profiles. And at that point, you're free to arc much further away from the surface velocity prograde. And I definitely don't want to take the orbital prograde yet, because it's not going to be pointed anywhere near the direction I want to be pointed. I might actually... do I have SAS control? Okay, then. I will take manual control of this then. Okay, so 1:40 into flight. So this is definitely a reason not to use the Atlas type staging or the actual Atlas FASA for things if you're not too experienced with realism overhaul and RP-0, because it's up to you to decide when you drop this ring, which is kind of what gives this the ability to get to orbit. So the heavier the payload is, the later you'd want to do it. Like if you're using an Atlas Centaur, which is a very heavy upper stage, you pretty much don't drop the rings until like just a few seconds before burnout anyway. For me, and in my experience, I keep an eye on this. So because I'm aiming for a relatively high orbit, like 600 burnout or something like that, I would want to both pitch further up, actually, than I am now. That's why it's good to do these simulations. And also hold on to those boosters a bit longer. So I'm definitely letting this get further along than I usually do. Okay, and let's drop that. So you see this huge change in my delta V, but not as big as before. When I don't have the upper stage, you don't get as much, because from the perspective of this stage, this is also dead mass. So let's see, what's the lowest point of this orbit? Because that's probably what I'd be aiming for to burn out at first. So about 860, so I need to get to a pretty high altitude for the burnout of this stage. So I'm going to follow the surface velocity vector directly. Actually, let's see what a roll position would give us. I just prefer to have the verniers at the side of the craft, like that. Oh, let's roll past that. All right then, rolling past that. Let's try 90. Just keep rolling. Just keep rolling. So I'm keeping an eye on this. So the higher I'm burning this, even the less, I'm going to get even less delta V from it. It's just kind of a simulation to get a feel for the trajectory, and also to even feel out if I'm going to have enough delta V to do this mission, which I might not with the heavy upper stage I currently have. In practice, this might not be enough rocket to carry this new reentry vehicle I've designed up to this orbit. That's why I'm doing it as a simulation. So still gaining. So this time is increasing, and I probably don't want it to keep increasing so much. So I'm going to arc down a bit more. So I can do, with my upper stage, I can do adjustments, but I really do need to kind of have both stages and everything burn out relatively close to this orbit, because I can do a bit of correction, but not a ton. So about 865. I'm nowhere near that right now, so which is what's leading me to feel that this craft isn't going to be able to carry this heavy payload up to that orbit. But we're going to find out, and by how short it is, because then I might just have to use my earlier re-entry vehicle instead of this one, and maybe test this out with the actual Agena-A once I have that, or test it out in a lower orbit just kind of on my own dime, or maybe not even orbital, just because it's harder to get something into a polar orbit. It takes more delta V than it would to go into the standard orbit just by heading straight east. Okay, so we're getting plenty of altitude there. And see, if you drop the ring too early, you're leaving yourself with a very anemic stage. So you're going to gain a lot of altitude while not gaining a lot of delta V. And the higher of an altitude you burn your fuel at, it starts to become a bit of a waste. So I'm going to get some science, not too bad for being near Earth, for returning this film camera, but not a ton. But it's a really good mission challenge to place something into a polar orbit, take pictures with it and return it. And once you've done it once you've really figured out that challenge in RP-0 once, it's kind of a skill or a development you can carry forward into future RP-0 games. And it's one I personally haven't accomplished yet, specifically the film return. So do I have, let's see, there we go. I think this is the, sorry, this is the mod I was talking about. Let's see, I don't get the name of it by clicking on it, but I believe that's the one for transferring. So that's for to say, if you look at how the actual Corona satellite worked, so they'd send, on an Agena-A or Agena-D, they'd send up this camera. It would have spools of film, so they'd take all those pictures, but they wouldn't return the whole, the whole camera and payload back to the ground. They would, in practice, just return a bucket, a film bucket, capable of surviving re-entry and the film itself. But here I'm both, going to try to return the whole film capsule. That's part of why the craft is heavier. So I might have to rethink that design if I'm just nowhere near being able to reach orbit with this. We will find out. I think I'm near it. Maybe not the closest, not the best. Part of the trouble, part of the real trouble. Oh, of course, and I was going to dump that first. So let's drop that. Make sure the engine is settled. It says stable. All right, so let's light it. Actually, now that I think about it, this stage burns for a really short time. So notice how my time to AP is really high. So I probably should have just lobbed this, up to 600, and then only lit the stage at that point. And if it had enough, if it had tons, whoa. Let's just try the orbital prograde and see if it's able to carry that out. Looks like it. I'm not sure why. I must have something in my payload must be, off center, because it keeps trying to pull to one side when I don't have SAS on. My parachute's not perfectly on center, but I wouldn't think that's enough mass to pull it off so much. I don't know. I'll have to look at I'll have to look at my design. That's why it's worth flying these test missions. But anyway, normally to do something like this, I would have designed or expect myself to have a longer burning upper, because ultimately you want to get to your apoapsis and then continue burning. That's always my goal. The real fuel's hypergolic plumes seem to be shifted. I mentioned that to Felger, who manages the real plumes and improves them. That seems to be a glitch in the most recent version of real plumes. So because I'm not at apoapsis, this number is going to keep increasing. This is going to keep getting better too. But ultimately, I want to have, lobbed the Atlas to that altitude and then burned until I got into a circular orbit. Particularly because I can't relight the stage, which is an entire concept I haven't discussed or opened up, because we haven't yet got any relightable upper stages. But the Agena-D, or the Agena-B/D, is one of the first craft that is capable of doing that. It's because I still have so much vertical speed that this just keeps cranking up, and it's getting to way higher than we want it to. But in practice, it seems like this craft might have enough delta V to do what we want to do with it. But ultimately in this video I covered designing it, yeah, this test of it, of course a lot of the difficulties, what we're trying to do, but it looks like it might have enough delta V to carry out this mission. I just need to do it properly. Like one crazy thing I could do would be to drop the ring for the Atlas so it burns for a really long time, but then I'd lose delta V and efficiency from that. So that would be a way to kind of artificially increase the length of the burn time of the first stage and a half. That's making me dizzy. Free camera, yeah, kind of allows me to sweep around. So you can see where we're going to arc over. So we are in orbit. It's not a terrible orbit. It's a good medium Earth orbit, but it's nowhere near, like this is practically circular, 865 by 865 that we're going to be aiming for. But with the design of this Agena-A and the design of this craft, we definitely wouldn't want to light this stage until we were pretty close to apo. And we would want that apoapsis to be pretty close to our target, one of our target orbital nodes, whether it's this one or this one, but ultimately both of those are 865 kilometers, so that's what we would be targeting for. But anyway, let us separate this. I'll just test the rest of the systems in the time I have left. So yes, that is true. Oh, actually, so in hindsight, this did have it has a bunch of hardware on it that would have allowed me to maybe get a little more juice out of it. I could have tested them, but ultimately it wouldn't be enough to bump this up to 600 at all, or bump this back down to 600. But always before you get rid of a stage, like if you're stable, if you're like you can rely, once you're in orbit of any kind and you don't plan to give up or revert or anything, you have time to relax. You should always give yourself time to relax and think. So I should have stopped and thought, is there anything I can do with what remains in this stage? Sure, the main engines had run out of fuel, but I could still have have done some potential stuff with that. But this craft itself has this high test peroxide, so that's why when I had RCS on and was thrusting forward, it is creating a thrust of about just under 1.4%. So enough for a little bit of orientation. I did a calculation. I checked the mass of this empty, the mass of it full. So the mass of it full is that. The mass of it dry is about 740 some kilograms. And so with the ISP of this, this craft has 400 meters per second of delta V, which is should be plenty for it to deorbit itself. But I'm just going to test out all of its systems before I end this video. So these are pointed back and down a little bit. So that's not going to deliver me the full, say, 400 meters per second of delta V because they're not pointed directly in one direction. Some of that energy is going to get wasted. Just like I can't thrust forward, in the prograde direction of my vehicle. That's cool. You can see that stage slowly wandering away behind us there. Just because these are pointed out, it can't thrust me forward. Because these aren't pointed perfectly backwards, they also can't thrust me forward perfectly. But it's more than half. It's it's trigonometry. So it's root 2, something like that, half of root 2 or something. I'd have to look it up, but I know that at 45-degree angle like this, it's not super inefficient. Actually, let me just pull out my handy calculator. 0.7, yeah. So by having them angled 45 degrees there, I will still get 0.7 of my 70% of the delta V, which is pretty good, which is still enough to deorbit from 600 by 600, I believe. Nice, and we've actually delivered enough delta V here. You can see we're actually getting enough oomph. You can see us moving, not insubstantially relative to that previously burned out stage, which I find looks really, even nicer with planet shine on them. And it looks even more photorealistic because you get a light blue shine from underneath. But I don't have that on this install because it just gives me trouble. I have trouble getting it to kind of cooperate with other mods. So over water, we could collect some film here. And I don't believe it's just a one-off, but I could be wrong. It should be or in my opinion, it would be the kind of experiment where I'd be able to gather science, transfer it out, and then be able to do it again. But I could be wrong. Review photographs, take photographs. Maybe you can only take photographs over one biome at a time, but I'll have to check into that. But it's, it's definitely able to get this craft into orbit. I'm just going to have to do another test, off screen, off camera, to see if it can put it specifically into that orbit that I want to put it into. But thanks for watching. We've kind of working on this new craft with no engine failures, which was excellent. Just good luck. Engine starting to get a bit of experience. We're able to put this into orbit. We'll see what we need to do to be able to complete that contract. So thanks for watching. Goodbye.